And now we're going to be chatting with Professor Thuli Madonsela. We're going to ask the question, what is social justice and why should it be prioritized? And Professor Madonsela joins us via Zoom.
Good morning.
Now
Good
I've got
morning,
you. Now I got you.
and good morning to listeners. Thank you for the privilege. It's an honor, really.
It's really good, and I've just been such a big fan, and I want to thank God for Thuli Madonsela in this particular country for ability to speak the kind of truth to power. I've looked at your life, and I want to thank your parents, Bafana and Nomasonto, for giving birth to you, and for this quest to bring, I think, justice to this particular country and to make this constitution that you've been part of. I think very few people know, in fact, that you were part of writing the constitution for our new South Africa.
True. I was privileged to be at the core of writing as one of the 11 core constitutional experts that did the first drafts, etc. I also had been privileged to work at the Center for Applied Legal Studies at Words, and we had helped the current governing party with early drafts of the Constitution, including having been the one to present our entire views on the Constitution to a constitutional conference of the ANC PWV, which is Gauteng today.
Few people know that you were an activist. You were a card-carrying member of the African National Congress till 2007. You were part of the United Democratic Front. You were in the trenches in the fight for a new South Africa. I believe you were even nominated by the African National Congress to take up a place in Parliament in 1994, which you declined. Card-carrying member till 2007. Is there a reason why you didn't continue post 2007?
Yes, there's a reason. It was for professional reasons that I chose to be non-aligned. People often think that it's because of the current shenanigans. I think the shenanigans followed much later.
Yeah, so for professional reasons, you thought you'd step out of the fray and have a more balanced look at politics, and maybe that was a very important decision to make in terms of this country and its recent history. We're going to talk about social justice. Should social justice maybe occupy a more prominent position, a top-of-mind position for all of us in this particular country than, presently where it's located in our mind. But before we get there, maybe we should understand what is social justice. Let's not take it for granted. What is social justice, Prof. Madonsela?
In its barest essence, as conceived by people like John Rawls and the originator of the concept, Luigi Tapparelli, in 1843, social justice is about fairness to all. So at the core of it is justice, and it's justice whose essence is fairness to all. At the chain social justice at Stellenbosch University, we have used constitutional court jurisprudence and pronouncements from the United Nations to craft what in concrete terms does social justice mean. And we think it's the equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms by everyone in a group and between groups. And this would be reflected in a just, equitable, and fair distribution of all opportunities, resources, benefits, privileges, and burdens. So how burdens and privileges of living together are distributed is the essence of social justice.
We can't look at social justice in isolation. Restorative justice, what role does it play within the concept of social justice?
It's very essential. For example, when John Rawls thinks about social justice, he thinks about fairness that includes human solidarity. We have to take care of those who were born disabled, because many of us are lucky not to have been born disabled. Some were born into rich families, etc. But in countries like South Africa, you cannot only just look at social justice as inclusive of solidarity. It should also be inclusive of restitution, and restorative justice. And Justice Dikgang Moseneke puts this very more clearly in Minister of Finance versus Van Heerden, that in South Africa, without restitutive action or redress, there can be no justice. And you and I know that as long as there's injustice anywhere, there cannot be sustainable peace.
And we've not really performed well on the front of redress. We have a country where the wealth gap is getting better, and we're not growing out of a divided apartheid past necessarily to the extent that we would have hoped. So we've been lacking on that particular front. The cart and the horse, Doctor, what would you perceive as the priorities for this country at this moment in time?
You did give us the priority at the very beginning by saying, should we put social justice at the center? And my answer would be yes. The Constitution does so. It talks about us adopting it in order to heal the divisions of the past and establish a new society that is based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Trust me, this country will never work until we come to terms with justice, particularly social justice. And I think judges have warned us, one of them being Justice Edwin Cameron in the case of Daniels versus Kribante, that the past has not left us and it will not leave us until we reckon with its claim to justice.
Does the Constitution do justice to our needs, especially on a historical front? Or is it a dynamic kind of document? And in the past, 26 years, we've learnt more. Is it something that must keep pace with our understanding and maybe with our shortcomings as well? So the Constitution in itself, is that a great foundation on which to pitch our efforts at social justice?
Well, many say no. They say it's a Potemkin constitution that glosses over realities and pretends that we're equal. And there's a movement among young intellectuals that calls itself constitution abolitionists. But on the 21st of February, we have somebody who was not only one of the drafters of the Constitution, he was on the other hand of interpreting it and has written some of the most groundbreaking judgments in this country, who will be telling us what's wrong with our country. And I suspect he will tell us there's nothing wrong with the Constitution. There's everything wrong with how we've used it. I mean, you can have the best of plans, a Herbert Baker, a architectural design. If you give it to somebody who has no interest in implementing it or no skills to implement it, somebody who was building rondavans, they're not going to implement the Herbert Baker. And you can't then say Herbert Baker is a terrible architect. You've got to look at the gap between what Herbert Baker gave you and what has happened. And I suspect some of the laws that we implemented were not resonant with the social justice vision in the Constitution. But even some of the ones that we did craft and implement, we ignored them. Land laws, the Equality Act, and therefore it's like getting a script from the doctor, coming home using 10% of it and putting the rest of it in your cupboard and hope that you're going to heal. It's not going to happen.
So we can then anticipate that the keynote address by Justice Albie Sachs is going to say that the Constitution is sufficient. It is the people, the leadership that has been lacking in this particular country on so very many fronts. It's easier to change the Constitution than the leadership by the looks of things. How then do we align leaders with this dream of a country that is prescribed nearly in the Constitution.
You really start with vision-based leadership. You look like somebody who may have played some sport. And one of the sports my kids played when they were small and I bought them was darts. And imagine you have a dart and there's a center at the dart. And every time you're throwing at your dart, you don't look at that bullseye. You just throw in that direction and you hope somehow it will stick. So this is my view, is I think our leaders, every time they speak, they should mention the constitutional vision. For goodness sake, it's so simple. It's 3 goals: democratization, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Because that galvanizes your thinking and the thinking of the people that have to follow you to focus on the goal. And the Constitution talks about we're building a society where everyone's potential is freed, every citizen's potential is freed, and every person's potential is freed, and every citizen's life is improved. So if those 5 things were at the core of everything they said and everything they did, and before they sign off something, they would say, would this achieve these 5 things? So for me, it's purpose-driven leadership. At Tuma, we talk about your leadership has to be ethical. In other words, start with the principles. What principles underpin what I'm about to do? Purpose. Where is this taking everyone to and why? Impact conscious. What would be the impact of doing this? I've spoken, for example, about our health system. When we decided to go for efficiency, we lost on equity. People in rural areas in the Northern Cape, in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Eastern Cape, have to travel kilometers and kilometers for the barest of medical attention because we forgot the Constitution and allowed experts from nowhere to tell us that efficiency was the key. So before you accept any advice from an expert, firstly tease out, where is this taking you to? Ask them, what does the picture look like at the end of the day? What principles underpin what you're trying to do? What's the total strategy? Because a society is a system like a body. So you can't just tinker without looking at what else is happening and how will everything work together and what will be your performance guardrails. And of course, when it talks to performance guardrails, we can't end a South African story without talking about corruption and maladministration. So you've got to say, how will we make sure that there's a proper turnaround strategy on ending corruption, maladministration, and just indifference, just people who just don't care.
We made some really great inroads on the issue of restorative justice earlier. I was talking about Kada Asmal delivering 1 million taps to people who had never had the privilege previously and celebrating that particular moment. There's so very many of those examples in the early part of our democracy. So we've kind of nearly failed in the process of trying to level the playing fields. We have lost a lot of time in the process, and yet we are saying this country is kind of requiring the kind of leadership to deliver the kind of social justice that we all kind of dream of. In fact, we lament the quality of leadership, and we do not have faith in the leadership throughout the political kind of spectrum. Where are these leaders going to come from, Prof. Thuli Madonsela, to deliver this amazing constitution? And of course, it's by implication delivery of the poorest of the poor from the past.
Well, I believe we are the leaders we keep looking for, me, you, and everyone else in South Africa. And leadership is not about, summiting Kilimanjaro in one step, and I should know I've summited it twice. It's about taking little steps. It's about working together. I was encouraged when the current president said he's reclaiming the steps of President Nelson Mandela. And I've just indicated what happened when we started this journey. It doesn't happen by accident. President Nelson Mandela had a message, a very clear message to us, and equality and human rights was always at the core of that message. But as departments, we were required to do two things: meet basic needs and become globally competitive. So everything that we had to do, and I was at the center of driving the strategy for the Department of Justice, so to transform the courts, to transform the state legal services and constitutionalism. At the core of that was, let's meet basic needs, let's become globally competitive. And the moment you try to become globally competitive without meeting basic needs, you are missing a step. You are like how capitalism took ground in South Africa. It took a country that had not been industrialized and suddenly railroaded it into capitalism, and with much suffering, people had to be kicked out of their land and in order to proletarize them overnight. So Mandela was very clear that for this country to function, the gaps in development that had been humanly manufactured needed to be part of the solution. As we're trying to catch up with the rest of the world, we needed to make sure that the rest of our people catch up with each other. And I think at some stage that got lost. And I think part of it was when we abandoned the RDP. And I don't blame any president. I just say, going forward, when presidents accept advice from consultants, they've got to ask, what does the total picture look like when we've done this? What else is part of the strategy? Because a transactional approach forgets that a society is a system. You need systems thinking, you need futuristic thinking, and you need to use data. Today, we are lucky in that we've got these data analytics that we can use. Before we implement a policy, we can literally implement it in a computer. Like you guys would have played a game called Sims. So you can really play. We used to call it a mandlwane. So you can really play around in a computer about, if I implement this policy or this social scheme, what will the future look like? It might not be 100% accurate because computers depend on what we feed into them, what is called machine learning. But it will give you a sense of whether there's going to be undesired impact that undermines the equality that you're trying to achieve. And then you can then tweak your policy. By the time you unleash it on real human beings, it is impact conscious and it is future conscious and has been modified to be as harmless as possible, but more importantly, as it should be as vision aligned as possible.
You mentioned the departure from the RDP project as nearly a setback to our democratic project, and that departure from RDP was in favor of GEAR. Is that the point that you make first and foremostly? Secondly, we are like a microcosm of the entire world in terms of rich and poor, in terms of diversity, etc. If we're solving the problems in this particular country, we're solving the problems in the world. Is it even possible?
It is possible, but as we are part of a microcosm of the world, we are also an outlier. And this is where our policy pathways have been terrible, is we forgot that South Africa is an outlier. There's no country in the world, and I mean this, where humans were kicked out of their land and not allowed to own land. And even those who were working as sharecroppers were not allowed, eventually after 1913, were not allowed to be sharecroppers. So they turned into slavery of a special kind. So nobody else had that system in the world. If you borrow their policies blindly, you're not going to be able to solve the South African problem. And then secondly, a lot of the economic advisors firstly follow economics. Economics is about the study of scarcity. It's not about the study of human progress. So you've got to bring in your economists and bring them together in one room with your sociologists. And I would say these days, even bring in your psychologists. So that, yes, it's important the scarcity because there are certain resources that are scarce and they cannot be replicated. So how you're gonna drive human progress, you've got to be economic. But don't drive economics, drive human progress, because societies are groups of humans and we come together in societies to better our lives. If being part of a society is not going to better my life, then what happens is people turn against society. And this was foreseen as long ago as the time of Plato. In his Republic, Plato's Republic, he talks about how injustice breeds resentment, and resentment eventually breeds violence.
Prof.
So where we are is not accidental. It's just bad advice, well intended, but we are an outlying country. We need to have outlying solutions.
We have Prof. Thuli Madonsela with us. She's the director for the Center of Social Justice at Stellenbosch University. Prof. Madonsela, of course, joining us. We're going to talk about the lecture, the iconic institutional court, iconic constitutional court justice Albie Sachs, soon to deliver the 4th annual social justice lecture entitled Social Justice and the Constitution. The question, is this the country we were fighting for? And of course, Prof. Madonsela with us. I think you're going to get a few, probably everybody's going to say, no, this is not the country that we've kind of been working towards. There's probably going to be a few people that say, yes, it is. But we got pretty big challenges. How does a conversation by one of our stalwarts on especially this particular front, judiciary, how is this going to change the realities that we confront? Does it just make us understand the lay of the land a little better? And does it empower us to play our little role? You said we are the leaders. We are looking for a messiah that's not going to pitch. And unless somehow we step up to the plate, we become the leaders, are we going to see the change and see the change and the possibilities that the Constitution proposes?
Thank you. Clarence, I agree with you 100% that we're not going to see much change unless each one of us understands where we're going, why are we stuck, and what needs to be done. And then each one of us takes whatever step we can take to make a difference. Just in the news, you read about the sad passing of AKA. It really broke my heart. And I can imagine the sorrow of the family, his child, mom, dad, friends, and fans. It's just horrendous. But what people don't know is that AKA was one of the few leaders who had made the question of fees, university fees, his problem. And I remember when it started during Fees Must Fall, and when we started Action for Inclusion, he was willing to lend his voice. Before COVID, he was going to do a conference, actually, I'm sorry, not a conference, a concert, just to raise fees for these students. Again, you see, when people stop things from moving forward for others, it's when they're saying, I'm supposed to belong to this society. And justice, including social justice, dictates that I should be treated fairly. And where is fairness when there's a constitution that promises to free the potential of every person and to improve the life of every citizen? Yet here am I. I have a place at a university, and the only reason I can't proceed is I owe fees. And most of them owe fees because they are the so-called missing middle. NSFAS takes people at a particular threshold. What people don't realize is that they look at income of your mom and dad, but they don't look at how many children is your mom and dad supporting and what other relatives are they supporting. So a whole lot of the people who are the so-called missing middle are really not the missing middle. They are poor if we really, really look at poverty properly.
Prof, just a couple of messages in via WhatsApp. I want to share them with you, and if you want to respond, you're welcome. People always say that Prof Madonsela isn't a politician, but if she was and could become president of our beautiful but poor, beleaguered country, our future could be saved. She's such a wonderful person. I'm a huge fan and admirer of her greatly, says Jenny in OBS. I don't know if there's a response that you want to give to Jenny. Prof?
Thank you, Jenny. And I really don't want to be a politician, but here's my promise: raising young leaders that can lead us. And I'm at Stellenbosch University. I meet young people that I get a sense that they get it. And it's really not about, as I say, climbing Kilimanjaro in one day. It's just young people realizing they have the power to make a difference. At the Thuli Madonsela Foundation, known as Tuma Foundation, it's the same thing. I meet young people every day. One Young World, which is a global collective of young people from all over the world. I meet young people that are making the difference. And if I can make a contribution towards that, then I am playing my part. I also meet the business community. Much as business was at the center of creating our ugly past in this country, but today there are many businesses that don't think it's just enough to throw crumbs at communities whilst being exploitative. They're part of really creating a country for all people and a world that is fair to all. Because a world that is fair to all is a sustainable world.
Absolutely. The lecture held on the 21st of Feb, is this open to everybody? Or is
It is.
Oh, wow. Okay. So how do we get our seat?
Please reach out to our social pages and also the Stellenbosch website, which is www.su.ac.za. And we really invite you, whether you're a judge, a minister, a member of parliament, an ordinary Kokotlamini, a student, etc., please come and listen. This is a man who joined the struggle, not because he had to, but because he believed that he wanted to live in a fair world. And he joined the struggle. He lost his hand in that struggle. He was at the core of creating the very first drafts of the Constitution from the ANC side. So when people talk about a Bill of Rights having come from the back pocket of President F.W. de Klerk, they don't know what they're talking about. And Albie Sachs will tell you about where did the Bill of Rights come from.
An incredible man, Justice Albie Sachs, of course, doing the lecture on the 21st of Feb, hosted by the Centre for Social Justice and the Law Trust Chair in Social Justice Studies at Stellenbosch University. And there, Prof, there's some questions in about how do we create jobs? We don't have time for that, unfortunately, but hopefully we'll find another opportunity to get into the head of Prof Madonsela. And you want to take note of what is happening at Stellenbosch University on the 21st. If you can be there physically, great. I think you're going to leave inspired. Get hold of the speech thereafter if you're unable to be there, and read it. These are some of the greatest brains who are applying their minds to our challenges and the better future that we are dreaming of. Thank you, Prof Madonsela. We appreciate your time.
It's been a privilege.